Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LPL week number 4 overview and analysis video here in the spring split. It's time to get into what is kind of the middle week here in the LPL regular season, really starting to get into the thick of things when it comes to Group Ascend and Group Nirvana. Honestly, by the end of the week, we're going to have a pretty good idea of where a lot of these teams stand, especially in Group Nirvana, because it's single round robin. Some teams are going to be digging themselves into holes that it's going to be very difficult for them to get out of. Other teams are going to start to find themselves a little bit safer. And for Group Ascend, we're definitely getting a better idea of where all of these teams land, even if right now it's still just a gigantic, slop at the top of the standings to find out who the number 1 team actually is. I'm excited. I hope you guys are as well. Again, as a reminder, I don't want to flood you guys with this at the beginning of every single LPL video, but if you want to see my thoughts live, you can go ahead and check out the LPL English cast. I will be on it the night of May 1st and the night of May 2nd, so back-to-back nights. That'll be Thursday night and Friday night. Obviously, kind of depending on where you are, technically it's the morning of Friday and Saturday, just with the way that things line up because it's over the night here in the United States. But I will be covering the OMG and RNG series, the Bilibili and Weibo series, and then the first series of the day after. So 3 series in a row covered from me on the LPL English channel. Links to that are going to be in the description for both the YouTube and the Twitch. Come say hi in the chat if you do come by and watch. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the content of this video because we're going over week number 4. If you are new to the channel, what we're going to do is go series by series talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover, and at the end of the week, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. We will be updating my personal power rankings from number 1 to number 16 at the end. Again, some people are going to talk about how, Group Ascend and Group Nirvana should probably be separated. I'm keeping them in the same power rankings for now because you do need to be one of the better teams in order to make sure that you can actually, get your spot into the playoffs. You do have to play a best of 5 if you're not one of the top 4 teams in Group Ascend, no matter what. That includes against Group Nirvana teams. And so if you're worse than a Group Nirvana team, that's a pretty big problem. But obviously, we'll touch on that at the end of the video. Most of today will be spent talking about the series themselves. So without further ado, let's get into day number 1. As per usual, we've got a ton of best of 3s to cover in today's video, so I don't want to waste you guys' time too much. And starting off with day number 1, we got a really big result in Group Ascend. We got LGD Gaming taking on Weibo Gaming, and Weibo is going to pick up the 2-1 series win, and this is a big one for Weibo. I think finding any semblance of, positivity over the past couple of weeks has not only been a bit challenging, but it's certainly been a bit inconsistent. I think there are definitely positives to how this team has played over the course of the Group Ascend stage so far, and I was really high on this team coming into this split. However, I just don't think they've been able to find that level of consistency they were looking for. I think some changes have come into this team. Obviously, the notable one, the main one that people are going to point out is Hong being replaced by Era as the starting support for this team, but I think it's a lot more than that. I think they are just starting to invest a lot more into playing through Xiaohu and just moving him around the map and trying to get him on these roamers like Talia and Ryze, and I think it's really working out a lot. Light's always going to be really consistent as a damage carry, and Tion gets to play a lot more aggressive in that regard. I think it's helped Weibo out. For LGD Gaming on the other side, this team is just inherently inconsistent because they are so reliant on being better than you. This is not a particularly good macro team. This is really not a team that has a ton of backup game plans. Their weak links right now have played really bad over the course of this year, notably Ala and Missing, who I think have just not been good at all for LGD Gaming. They've been some of the weaker players in their role in all of Group Ascend, but that means when you have an underperformance or a significant underperformance from one of the 3 main players on this team, Shun, Scout, or Pays, it's pretty impossible for them to actually be able to take down any good teams, and that's what we saw here. So let's go ahead and get into it. For Weibo Gaming, player of the series, kind of up to interpretation. I would say 2 real good options here. Xiaohu and Era, I think, are definitely the 2 that I would be looking at and that I think a lot of other people would be looking at as well. Xiaohu's going to get it for me for that Ryze game in game number 3, although the Talia was still very good in game number 1, and I'm not trying to discount what they were in game 2 either. They honestly maybe were the better team in game number 2. I think that there is an argument to be made there. They never really had full control of the map, but they were doing well in a lot of these fights and just couldn't win when it really mattered down the stretch. But Weibo is still a very good team, and I think you could make the argument that Xiaohu was just the best player in all 3 of these games because they're finally starting to play towards the win con of just moving him around the map, opening things up and making things a little bit easier for the rest of the team. Tion at times has struggled to be able to establish consistent early pressure throughout this split. I don't think that that's something that's entirely sustainable. Tion's just too good at that phase of the game. Even when he's playing bad, he's usually good in that phase of the game. For me to expect that to be like a real issue, but if that is something you're concerned about, Xiaohu playing Ryze, playing Talia, getting out on the map and moving a lot lot more. That's what's going to help fix that, and I think Weibo are definitely locking in on that style, and Xiaohu, to his credit, has been exceptionally good across the spring split. There have been a couple of up and down performances, most of that, in my opinion, coming from Tian just not being very consistent as a jungler, and those two roles are so interconnected in the current meta that it's really difficult to kind of peel them apart. But Xiaohu individually has been awesome, and he mega gapped Scout in this series, especially in game number 3, where that Rise was everywhere and the Hui was non-existent from Scout on the other side. So nice stuff coming in from Xiaohu. I also want to give a big shout out to Era. He's been an upgrade in the support position. I do want to continue with my stance. I'm certainly not changing my mind from last week, where I do think that it should be remembered that Weibo destroyed Hong, not that Hong was bad enough to get himself benched, because Hong was the most consistent support in the LPL before 2025, and then he comes over to this org that is just notorious for not having any consistent support play, whether it's On, whether it's Crisp, whoever it ends up being, Sword Art. It doesn't even really matter who's been on this org. They've never been consistent in terms of support play, and, you know, obviously Hong ends up getting benched because of his inconsistencies. That being said, Era has come in and really lit a fire for this team. I think he could potentially be a better fit. Obviously, this org loves him. He's been on the payroll for a long time. Again, I think I remember him like coming in to replace On at times many years ago. Maybe I'm just remembering sometimes with Crisp a couple of years ago, but Era has certainly been in the Weibo zeitgeist for quite a while, and he is now making the most of it. His first 2 series have both been really great. The Nico in particular in game 1 was really nice, but he's just a playmaker. You can tell he looks for a lot of those aggressive engages. It reminds me a lot more of Crisp's playstyle as opposed to Hong's playstyle. Hong was much more focused typically on the 2v2 and on being a more consistent mid-game player, whereas Crisp is just a wild card who's going to find a lot of these creative engages. Era is definitely built more in that mold. So excited to see if that continues onwards. Light continues to really be excellent. He's honestly been more of a background player for Weibo over the course of this split, but I think with better team play around him, he's going to have more opportunities to carry in the late game. Tian was good. Breathe has been excellent this split. Weibo's starting to find their form, and I was high on them coming into the split. I thought they were going to be a top 5 team in the LPL. They've not lived up to that, but they have the talent to be able to do it. It's just nobody's been able to find consistency so far at the top of the standings. And then for JDG on the other side, dud of the series is super easy. It's going to missing. This guy's bad. I don't know what else to say, man. This guy is just not a good League of Legends player right now. He's one of the weakest supports in Group Ascend, if not the weakest. Like, truly, some of the games we've seen for missing across 2025 have been horrendous, and this is kind of carryover from 2024, where I already thought he was a bit disappointing in terms of his outcomes, and with someone like Pays being kind of the strength, like the positive force for JD Gaming across this year, for his support to be as bad as he is right now, it's just completely unacceptable. Missing has fallen off now that you have to play Engagers, now that Enchanters are kind of out of the meta. It's clear that he was a bit more of a one-trick playstyle than we thought, and I think getting out of the meta where 2v2 dominance was more appreciated is not good for JDG. Now that you have to move around again as a support, I think he's really struggling in that regard. Ala also continues to just be really bad on the top side. Again, a top laner that has just completely fallen off. He has been a great top laner his entire career, regardless of what Reddit wants to tell you. This is a guy I was really pounding the table for in the offseason. I thought this was a great addition for JDG. I thought this was a huge upgrade to either Sheer or Flandra from last year, and he's been worse than both of them by a pretty consistent margin, in my opinion, including Sheer for FPX. I'm just really disappointed that he has not been nearly as good individually. Even on bad teams before, when he lost confidence, he still was able to perform. It's just not happening right now. And like I said, those two you kind of expect to not play well in matchups against actually good teams. That's what they've been doing all year. That means if one of Shun, Scout, or Pays does not step up and one of them has a really bad series, it's basically impossible for JDG to win, and in this case, it was Scout who played really poor. Xiao, who was just better than him on the other side of this. Scout's had a couple of bad series over the course of Group Ascend. I still want to give him a little bit of grace because, again, there's so much responsibility on him in comparison to a lot of the other mid laners in the league right now, but it is worth noting that a lot of my positivity for Scout came from the end of summer and from winter, where I thought he was really good. He was a big reason why this team finished top 3, and I think people forget that this was a top 3 team in the winter split just a couple of months ago, but Scout and Pays were the reason that the team got there. For Scout to not be as good in spring so far, it's not entirely shocking. This guy can go through some ups and downs. We've seen that over the past couple of years, but it's definitely disappointing. Pays probably had the first series where he didn't feel like he was 1v9ing. He just couldn't really do anything on the hyper carry and Jinx in game 3. Shun was fine. He was aggressive. He certainly was trying to make plays, but oftentimes was overextended. JDG felt outclassed in this one, and that's not a great sign, but for Weibo, it's a nice win. Hopefully they can keep this going. Xiao, who looks incredible. The Spring King is definitely here, and Era does look like an upgrade in the support position. There's something here. It's not really about their good wins, though. It's about their bad losses, and we still need to see what happens when they start playing the weaker teams in Group Ascend. Then moving on to our second series of day number 1, and it's a pretty classic matchup here in the LPL, longtime rivalry, WE taking on Invictus Gaming, and IG is going to pick up the 2-0 win, and the only shocking thing about this series and about IG taking it is that IG actually won pretty cleanly with the exception of a couple of team fights from Rookie in the back half of game number 2, and that WE ends their 1-2, I should say, streak over the past few series. They've pretty consistently been able to take a game off of some of the better teams in the LPL, but Invictus, you knew they had to be the ones to stop it one way or another. They either were going to win this series 2-0 or lose this series 2-0. There was never going to be any in between when it came to them, especially once WE started going on that little hot streak. So credit to IG. There are still some takeaways for WE that really aren't all that bad. I don't think this team is nearly as bad as I thought they were going to be. I think that's obvious by the fact they're in Group Ascent at all, but really, I think they're actually playing well in certain areas. We'll get into it, obviously, as we talk more about WE. For Invictus, on the other side, my player of the series is going to go to Gala in the bot lane. I think this might be a bit of a controversial one because the Shy was simply so good, especially on the Gwen in game number 1. Still was very useful in the Yorick in game number 2, and I think a lot of people are going to look at that and just go, yeah, it should probably be the Shy, and he was better than Cube, and Cube was awful on the other side, but man, I'm serious, if you didn't, take a critical eye to this series, I don't blame you, because there really was no reason to, but go watch Gala in these team fights. Game number 1 was exceptional, but that game 2 is one of the best AD carry performances I've seen in a very long time. Gala is so good at Misfortune, he's been good at this champion all year long. You know, Reddit will like to tell you that MF is unplayable. Some players are really good at this champion, who would have thought? And Gala is one of the best Misfortunes in the world in terms of just how he plays out a lot of these games. He's found a ton of success on it over the course of this year, and it's not even just like the bullet times. Obviously, those are dealing a ton of damage, and he's very useful in fights because of that. Go watch his gliding. Go watch his positioning in all of these fights. This is textbook AD carry play. If you want to learn how to get good at AD carry, this is a great game to go and watch because he just does everything at such a high level. Gala, one of those players that when everything is clicking for him, when he feels comfortable on the Rift, it just looks so good. He's a very aesthetically pleasing League player to watch because he does everything at a pretty nice level, and again, I think one of the big reasons why Varus, Misfortune, a lot of the champions in that category are so successful for Invictus and so successful for Gala is because they're not hyper carries, nor are they lane dominant. Misfortune can obviously dominate lane. She's really good at that if you put her in the right situation, but she doesn't have to be. She's a very consistent skirmisher in the early game, and that's why you end up picking her, and it takes a lot of the pressure off of Gala to be the guy. I think when you're asking him to be the number 1 option for a team, he does perform worse in that situation. When he's asked to be the number 2 or number 3 guy, he performs better in those situations, even if he can do both. I think this is the sweet spot for Gala, and I think he's playing better recently because of that. There have been a couple of games he's been more hit or miss than I think his record would indicate in terms of my player of the series versus dud of the series counter, but he's still a very positive player for Invictus overall. And of course, the Shy was actually really good in this series. That's not always going to happen, especially with what we saw last week where he was actively sprinting in and was one of the worst players in the entirety of the LPL, but he turned that around with the Gwen game in particular in game 1. The Yorick was still good in game 2. Just get him confident and comfortable. Cube is not the kind of player that can go up against the Shy and actually survive. Mako was much better. I think the macro in general for Invictus was much better, with really the exception of game 2, where there were some moments that were more up and down, but game 1 was super clean from them. You don't typically see performances like that. Jeje continues to be awesome, the best player on this team. And then Rookie. The only thing I'll say about Rookie is I thought we had learned last week. We had really gotten into the headspace and really started locking in that, okay, Rookie should be playing Azir, Talia, Ryze, Orianna, these champions that he's been playing for a decade. Those are the champions that Rookie has been good on. You know what champions Rookie has not been good on? Yone, Aurora, Akali, these aggressive types of assassins. It's just not looked good at all from him throughout this year. Get him off of Yone. Stop trying to force this in the mid lane. It's not working for Invictus. Just let the dude play Orianna in peace. Let him be a control mage that scales into the late game. He does not need to be more than that. He's been really good in the control mage role. Just let him play it. It really does feel a little bit funny at this point that every single time he picks something like Yone, he has some terrible ultimates in team fights. He did not have a very good game number 2, but it didn't really matter. The rest of the team was too far ahead, and Gala in particular was strong. But for WE, on the other side, credit to Taiyun, man. This guy's actually really starting to step up. He's definitely playing the best league of his entire life at the current moment. I've been so low on him throughout his entire career, whether it was in the LCK, obviously, where he just got absolutely blasted, or in Winter Split here in the LPL, even in the Challengers League, where I kind of talked about his tape not being very good. Like, Taiyun never really felt like a player that deserved a tier 1 shot. He got it here on WE, and he's been given time to grow with the rest of this roster, even though he was bad at the beginning of the year, and it's kind of worked out for them. He's been a lot more consistent, especially as a mid-game skirmisher, than he was at any point previously. The Ezreal was good in game number 2. That's really kind of what I'm pointing out here. Everything else on WE, not ideal. I think Vampire continues to improve. This is a guy who, again, just really lacks the reps. He lacks the experience to be comfortable at this level, but I think as he gets more reps, as he starts playing against better teams more consistently, it does look a little bit better. Ironically, playing against Mako, the player he replaced on LGD Gaming last year, and it was fine. He certainly wasn't the problem. The bot lane wasn't the problem for WE here. Karis continues to be awful in team fights, actively just walked into every bit of damage in that final team fight on the Azir. Really not a great look from him. Cube is going to get dud of the series because he just got completely outplayed on the top side. He is just not functional really as a top laner right now. There have been some games that have looked passable, but this is what happens when you put someone like the Shy across from Cube. When Cube's going to struggle is those matchups where he has to play these really mechanically talented players. That's what the Shy is. I like Monkey. I think he's super aggressive. I don't think he's played super well over the past couple of series, but I do think he is kind of the pivot point for WE. So overall, this team is who we thought they were. I know that they lost 0-2 here, but this is basically what they showed last week, where they can stay competitive against teams that are decent and know what they're doing, but they're not going to be able to consistently walk away with wins, and Invictus gets a 2-0. It's positive for them in that vein as well. I don't expect consistency from Invictus. It's just kind of a fool's errand at that point, but it's nice to see that they have this in the tank. Then moving on to day number 2 now, and we get to take a trip down to Group Nirvana for the first time in week 4. It's LGD Gaming taking on RNG, and LGD is going to pick up the 2-0, and they're going to do so in pretty dominant fashion. Game 2 had a couple of back and forth moments. Milky Way was pretty alright on the Lee Sin. It's one of his better games in a while, but LGD is the better of these two teams, and it's pretty obvious to see. They decimated them in game number 1, and it really was a team effort. I don't even really love their draft. I think there's like a ton of issues with how they ended up drafting in game number 1. It just didn't matter. They outplayed them in every facet. And then game 2, they end up getting the dog, and the dog has been popping off in the LPL. And you know who also has been popping off? Nayu in the jungle here for LGD. He's gonna get another player of the series. I think this guy has played 3 series so far in Group Nirvana and gotten player of the series in all 3 of them. All he does is win. Like, he decimates these games. You cannot give him things like Neferi. I do not understand what the strategy was for RNG. I think that there is a real concern that this team is being managed incredibly improperly, because you have, you know, Milky Way trying to play Lee Sin as the answer to Neferi, and that's almost never going to work. Xin Zhao, of course, was off the board, but no Vi, no Poppy, no anything like that. No, none of the counters that have traditionally been considered as major ones into Neferi. We're not even seeing things like the Fiddlesticks that have been considered like theory counters to the Neferi. It's just, let's play Lee Sin, try to play Annie in the mid lane, and just generate as much pressure as possible. Well, sorry, Neferi got super fed in this game and was untouchable throughout all of the back half of it, and you had no answer. There was no way to ever stop the Neferi. So credit to Nayu. This guy has been dominant so far in Group Nirvana. Again, it's just so hard to get like a real read on him because he's playing really bad teams over and over again. He's not really been tested in that regard, but I don't know, man. LGD might have found something really special here. I was a huge fan of Nayu coming out of the LDL. Go watch my tape from the beginning of last year, like my preseason primer in 2024 if you want to hear more about that. Things obviously didn't work out on Rare Atom. A lot ended up going wrong for that team, but Nayu is a player that has shown a lot of promise as a prospect in the past and is finally, you know, really being given an opportunity to be a real player for this team, and it's really working out. But it wasn't just him. Everybody dominated this series. I'd love to point out Xiaoya for that Sivir game in game number 1. If he was even like slightly better on the Kalista in game number 2, perhaps I would have considered him for player of the series, but he was awesome on the Sivir, ended up really taking over a lot of those fights, did a ton of damage after being enabled by the Xin Zhao and the Alistair, and then the Kalista game just wasn't very good. Happens every once in a while. Zhao Qinghua in the mid lane, also a player that has just been super inconsistent, but if you want somebody to beat up on, Tong Yuan's a pretty good mid laner to give you that confidence back. He's not very good, and I think mechanically speaking, he continues to prove that. The Annie was not a counter to the Neferi rise. I will spoil that for you here. YCX has honestly been good over the past couple of weeks. I had no expectation for this guy coming into the LPL. I thought his LDL tape was totally fine, but he was very outshadowed, we'll just say, by a lot of the other players on that LGD team. And, you know, obviously, we'll see. We'll see if he can continue this and keep this up, is what I was trying to say there. But the Renata in game 2 was fine. The Alistair in game 1 was definitely better. I think he is an engaged player. I think that's become clear. And Sasi's very feast or famine on the top side. His good games look fantastic. His bad games look bad. Xiaoshu has been very disappointing this year, and so Sasi ends up winning that top lane matchup. Everything going right, especially in game 1 for LGD, and this might be the best team in Group Nirvana. I have them ranked as such at number 11 right now, so who knows? Nayu has really reinvigorated this team, and I'm happy to see it. And then for RNG on the other side, they're not very good, and they're not good in a way that's like really concerning, because we're really starting to get into the thick of things when it comes to Group Nirvana. You can't be losing too many more series, especially dropping 0-2. If you're bottom 2 this split, you're done. You haven't won a single best of 3 so far this year. That's not good. Like, RNG's in a really bad spot. This is one of the prestigious organizations in China for League of Legends, and there's a real shot that they are not even playing in the summer split. Everything is just going wrong for them. Tong Yuan's gonna get dud of the series, but really, like, everybody kind of deserved this. Everybody got obliterated in game number 1. Milky Way's the only one who I didn't consider for dud of the series because he at least tried on the Lee Sin in game number 2. That being said, he picked Lee Sin as the answer to Neferi. That in and of itself is a bit of greed, right? Like, that's just hubris coming back to bite you, that I can be more of a playmaker on the Lee Sin, that I can set my team up better than you can get yourself fed. It didn't happen. Milky Way's been very disappointing, but at the very least he tried in game number 2. But everybody else was on the table for dud of the series. I settled on Tong Yuan because I think his game number 1 was just so atrocious on the Yone. I think he was like legitimately unplayable, and I do think he was the worst player in game number 2 on the Annie. Everything just kind of not going his way. This is kind of the typical Tong Yuan performance. He fooled us into believing at the beginning of the year that he had turned a new leaf, that he had kind of flipped the corner. It didn't happen. This guy is still pretty bad and is still not worthy of being the mid laner for a prestigious organization like RNG, like he hasn't been really at any point over the course of his career. Xiaoshu has taken a massive nosedive down my top lane rankings. This was a guy who at one point was looking like a super promising young top laner in the league and has gotten worse every single year. Very similar to the player he came up at the same time as in Harry, except he's better than Harry, and you know, that should go to show you how bad Harry is. If Xiaoshu is like the positive version of that, but it's not looking good for him. Jiachi and Nickit weren't exactly solid in this series. They were getting absolutely blown back by Xiaoyan YCX, especially in that game number 1, and so it's just everything going wrong. RNG just not looking good in any circumstance. This looks like one of, if not the worst team in the entire league, and a big candidate to be one of the first 2 teams eliminated, which is a disaster for, like I said, one of the most prestigious organizations in League of Legends history. And then for LGD, they continue to overperform what people expect of them. They get into these Group Nirvana stages and actually show to be better than a lot of the bottom tier teams. They did the same thing last year. It's cool to see that this org has consistently been able to do at least a little bit on basically a nothing budget. That being said, obviously last year they did it in Group Ascend. They ended up barely winning any games there and then making playoffs. But, you know, overperformance has kind of become the name of the game for an org in LGD that's kind of known for not spending. It's pretty funny to see how their years end up going, you know, in back-to-back situations, but it's cool to see that they can continue to overperform what expectations are. Then moving on to our second series of day number 2, and we're going back to Group Ascend, but you know what? We are winning here today because it's Thunder Talk Gaming taking on Team WE, and WE win again. We win again. They pick up their first win of the Group Ascend stage, and you've just got to be excited for this team. Thunder Talk are obviously going to feel pretty disappointed to not walk out of here with a victory like everybody else does against WE, but you know what? This team's been leveling up. They've been getting better game over game, and it starts to feel like they are getting comfortable at this level. It's a very interesting conversation that we now have to start having, because WE was a team that just a week ago we had completely written off. Even with their, you know, 1-game wins against a lot of the top tier teams, they had never really looked like they were going to be able to take a series. It never really felt like they were going to be able to close things out. But here you go. Thunder Talk is a team that has been able to compete at least kind of near the upper part of the standings. They're not exactly the strongest team in Group Ascend, but WE is able to take a series off of them and do it in pretty dominant fashion. Game 1, Game 2, both of them were really, really positive for WE overall, and I just don't think a lot of people were expecting that. So credit to WE, bad credit to Thunder Talk. Take all the credit away. I'm really starting to sell hard on this team. They might be the worst team in Group Ascend. I think it's a pretty reasonable thing to say for them right now. I know that they have a couple of wins right now that look okay, like they beat FPX, and that certainly looks all right, but I don't know, man. The tape doesn't look all that good, in my opinion. I think there's like real concerns with where Thunder Talk is at. I think this team relies way too much on one kind of win condition, and a lot of their players are pretty exploitable in terms of their talent level, which we'll get into. But for WE, player of the series, pick one of the jungle mid duo. It's all just about, do you like the facilitation? Do you like the follow through? It's really up to what you prefer. In that instance, I'm going to go with the follow through. I'm giving Karis my player of the series. This guy's been the worst player in the LPL so far in 2025. I don't even think there's going to be a lot of people that really argue that. This guy's just bad. He's not able to win lane all that traditionally. He's not a good team fighter. He's really just not good at anything. And here he is completely dominating Satab, and that should go to show you where Satab is at in terms of his current progression. This guy is just not good at all, but Karis, at least he showed that it's possible to come out here and kind of dominate a matchup like this. It's funny because these two played against each other in the LCK last year, and I'm pretty sure Karis bodied that matchup as well. Satab is just not very good, and Karis just knows what to do when he gets those resources. He's just not very good at getting those resources, so you know, credit to him. This is more so for the Azir in game number 1, where he was kind of the main character, the main carry of that team with the Galio and the Skarner and the Leona. So much setup on that team to allow Karis to take over on the Azir in terms of the damage. And then he was still really good on the Orianna. The Rage Cage with him and Jarvan throughout a lot of that game number 2 was still a pretty big problem that ThunderTalk did not have an answer to solve. But that kind of, you know, brings me into the jungle position here with Monkey, who was the other player that you kind of have to shout out. That Jarvan game was exceptionally good. Jarvan looks really good when he's played in competitive. It's really funny to kind of watch a champion that I don't think is very strong, that I think I've kind of said on the past in this channel's history that he's just weaker Vi in the state that he's currently in. I think it's all a numbers thing. I think if you were to buff Jarvan's numbers and nerf Vi's numbers, perhaps that would flip around, but it's a champion that does essentially what Vi does, where you want to be a primary engage option. You have a little bit of peel, but for the most part, you're either going to win in the early game and be able to do whatever you want in the mid and late game, or you're not going to win early. You're going to dive in the late game and immediately die. It's kind of the same idea from Jarvan, at least from a principal perspective, but it pairs better with a lot of these control mages, and you know what? It's looked good. Monkey obviously made it look solid here. Beishuan didn't put up really any resistance on the other side of this jungle matchup, so who knows? Maybe we see more of this. Taiyun continues to play really well in the circumstances that he's in. Wasn't like a hard carry in either of these games, but didn't make any mistakes, and that's all you're really asking for out of this bot lane. Vampire was a little bit overeager at times, but I think that that's maybe being a bit disingenuous. He was totally fine in this series. A couple of really nice highlight plays, especially on the Nico. Cube goes, you know, 3-1 and 24, 1 death across 2 games playing tanks. That's what you want out of Cube. That's like the dream scenario when you signed Cube, is that he was going to be this good weak side top laner who was better than players like Hoya on the other side of this matchup. So for WE, just encouraging, good signs. And then for ThunderTalk, bad signs, not good. Beishuan lose, team lose. It's the same story. We've talked about this over and over again. Beishuan has 3 player of the series for me and 3 dud of the series for me across the spring split so far. He either wins or loses his team the game. It is like super obvious whether or not ThunderTalk is going to succeed, whether or not Beishuan can get that early advantage, and in this one he didn't. Monkey was better, and Beishuan's going to get dead of the series for it. The Sejuani in particular in game 2 just lost pressure almost immediately, and it's not like the Xin Zhao was a ton better. He's just too integral to this team to not have good games, and that's exactly what we saw here. I considered Hoya for dead of the series because he got blasted by Cube on the top side, which is never a good sign, but at least he was attempting to try and make some plays. He was trying to be aggressive. They just didn't work out. He was not very good. And then Feather in the support position was the other player that I kind of considered here. If you're going to pick Bard Jhin as a bot lane duo, you got to be a playmaker. You got to go out there and attempt to do something. And when Vampire is out roaming you on Nico when you're playing Bard, it's really, really bad. That is a GG go next type of situation. 1xN continues to underwhelm me, even though he was definitely the best player on his team. Satab got beat by Karis, which should go to show you everything you need to know about where Satab is at the current moment. This guy's not good. I hope you can recognize that at this point. I had Satab defenders in my comment section in the winter split. I hope they're all gone because this guy is really bad. But ThunderTalk is just crashing back down to earth. We kind of expected that the talent would eventually just kind of equal itself out because they were overperforming what their roster looked like. And, you know, maybe they're not a bottom 3 team like I projected at the beginning of the year, but they're certainly not a top 7-ish team like they thought they were going to be. And hell, they might not even be a top 8 team like we've kind of said they are for a majority of this year, because WE really had no trouble with them in this series. They were better by a large margin, and their tape in those spring split does look better than ThunderTalk. So it's I guess it remains to be seen, kind of to be determined, you know, matchup here. Potentially we see it as a qualification series to get into the playoffs, which would be very funny and very hype. But right now, how can you not take WE in terms of where these teams are at? Then moving on now to day number 3 here of week number 4, and we go back down to Group Nirvana for a matchup between OMG and LNG. That LNG is going to pick up a 2-0 win in that good form that they showed at the end of last week. It seems like it might be something they can replicate moving forward. I'm very excited to see if this becomes a bit of a trend for them, because at least right now, things are looking so much better for them than they did at any point at the beginning of this year that you have to imagine that it's sustainable. And honestly, it's all of the players on the team I do still have some concerns about the talent here, but a lot of these players I liked at the beginning of the year, or at least I liked like situation independent. I always thought that they were going to be a little bit under what people wanted them to be. They weren't exactly going to live up to that kind of hype, but I do think that there are good players on this team. There is talent on this team that has performed before. For OMG, I'm sorry, this is the worst team in the LPL. I think that's become even more clear after watching this series because they got destroyed, and this is with Hang having one of his more proactive series that he's had in quite a while. He's not just getting run over in the jungle like he had been over the past couple of weeks, but Harry is the worst top laner, like Hang is certainly in there. Charlotte came in and did absolutely nothing to make this team better in the mid lane, and now the bot lane has really started to fall apart. It's all just a disaster for OMG. This team is on a fast track to be the first team eliminated from the LPL, and getting absolutely stomped by LNG certainly doesn't help that regard. So let's go ahead and get into it. For LNG, player of the series for me, it has to go to Joao. Like, this was an incredible series from Joao in the support position. This was awesome. Everything you could ever want to see out of a support at this level. And I know that it's against OMG, and Moham completely sprinted it the entirety of this series. He was an absolute disaster on the other side of this matchup. But if you go back and watch my reviews for last year for Ninjas in Pyjamas, I was kind of talking about Joao as a player that kind of had been stuck with Fodic. Like, I know it's a really weird sentence to have, but this guy has never really gotten a shot to be even an average support at this level because he's constantly been playing with what I consider to be one of the worst AD carries at this level, and I think finally separated from Fodic, even though LP is not a good player. Like, I want to make that clear. LP is not as good as Starry, he's not as good as a lot of other players at this level. I think there is somehow more to work with when it comes to LP than it did with Fodic, if only because at least like LP's not going to throw the game away. He doesn't make those game-losing errors that Fodic made so consistently for LNG, for Ninjas in Pyjamas, for every team that he has played for Victory 5, even going back to that era with Rookie and with, you know, PP God on the team. He's never really been a player that you can trust in that regard to keep himself safe, to be in the right spot, to not make a major mistake in the back half of these games. I don't think LP offers the same kind of negativity, even if he doesn't have the same kind of mechanical upside. But somehow I think that is going to unlock Joao a bit more. I think this is a player who is a playmaker at heart and just has not been given the opportunity to be able to be that because his AD carry has been bad. Do I think this guy is great? No. I think we've seen enough tape of Joao at this level to know that he's never going to be a star, that he's never going to be the kind of player that you can rely on, but he is a player that I think could be good enough to win with at this level, to be top 9 or top 10 in the LPL, and you compound that on the fact that Xiaofang has come in and really upgraded this team in the jungle, and all of a sudden things really start to come together, and that's really kind of the crux of this for me. It's clear that this team is playing different in the early game around Xiaofang than they did around 5T5, or especially around Weiwei, where he was just way too resource heavy coming out of the jungle. Xiaofang is resource heavy, but in a very different kind of way, where he actually is very aggressive with those resources, and it does bleed over into his lanes to allow them to start to get going as well, and I think that that has really helped. Haichao, in the two series that we've seen Haichao with Xiaofang, it's been infinitely better for him. This guy was awful at the start of the year and the start of the split. It's really just not looked good, but since Xiaofang has come in, again, small sample size, so you don't want to overreact, Haichao's been awesome. He was really excellent and kind of a contender for player of the series for me, although Shuo kind of ran away with it. Zika has been awesome all year long. You don't need to worry about him. He's been the one good player on LNG throughout all of 2025, but it feels like everything else is really starting to come together for this team with the new additions, and Xiaofang in particular has really upgraded them, but I think even just getting rid of Fodic in the bot lane could allow Shuo in the support position to actually just start playing a ton better. So hopefully this is the start of something for LNG. After one win, I moved them out of my bottom 2. It feels like I was correct in that assertion with how they played here against OMG, but OMG is also really bad, so you don't want to take too much against this because this team is not good anywhere. They were good in the bot lane for a little bit because Starry is a pretty solid player. Mid lane was pretty hit or miss, but against the bad teams, you could often see Lin Feng do something, and then Lin Feng got replaced by Charlotte, who comes in to try and salvage the season, but now they just don't have any strength. Charlotte's not very good in lane. He's playing Azir and Corki and getting completely outroamed by Haichao, who just plays with this jungler better, even with Hang being much more aggressive in this series than he has been recently. A lot of that is because Xiaofang just naturally opens up more opportunities for the opposing jungler to play a little bit farther forward, a little bit more aggro, just because of the way that he plays the game, but You know, Hang's been a disaster this year, and even this series wasn't his fault. Dud of the series was honestly really easy. It's Moham. If Zhuo was, like, really dominating on the other side of this with the Nico, with the Nautilus really being this big playmaker, this fight starter, Moham was just there to die. He did nothing else throughout the entirety of this series, and you can see that in the KDA. It reflects itself in terms of the gameplay and the tape. It's just not a good look for a player that was at Worlds last year. I think people forget that sometimes, that this was a Worlds player in 2024. I get it. It was like a last-minute replacement for D plus Kia, but to see where he has fallen is just really disappointing. This is a player that I think I and a lot of other people had at least some kind of expectation for, especially pairing up with a player like Starry. Moham is super one-dimensional. He's basically just an engager one-trick. He can only play Rel. I know that was kind of the big narrative coming out of the LCK, but, you know, Rel, Nautilus, Rakan, those are the kinds of champions he can pilot at even a remotely functional level. He's not going to be able to deviate from that strategy really at all, but even then, that should be enough. That should be enough setup for you to be relevant at this level, and it just wasn't. And it's really starting to, you know, I guess play out on Starry, who's started to play a lot worse. You know, Charlotte obviously hasn't been an upgrade, but you've got the worst top laner in the LPL. Harry is genuinely unplayable. I think this guy is, like, nowhere close to LPL level. I think he would be like a lower tier LDL player in terms of how I've identified his tape over the past couple of years, and they continue to bring him back. He was on this team last year and he was playing bad, and they brought him back for 2025. It just feels very strange here on OMG. A lot of weird things happening with this org, but honestly, you can tell they're trying to salvage their season, and it's just not working. I don't know what they need to do in order to stay relevant, but right now, it's all collapsing, and if you asked me, yeah, this is the worst team in the LPL. This would be the team I would bet on to pretty much guarantee miss out on making it to the summer split in their current form. But congrats to LNG. This team has really turned things around with their roster changes. It feels like they've unlocked a new playstyle, and hopefully that means a lot of these players can start getting some confidence back. Hai Chao, in particular, is playing a lot better ever since Xiao Fong came in, and obviously, he's been a big upgrade in the jungle position, but Zhuo playing a lot better here than he did earlier on with Fodic. Hopefully just the new configuration allows the players that were already on LNG to really express themselves more so that they can kind of stay out of those bottom two standings. Then moving on to our second series of day number 3, and we finally get a back-and-forth banger in 3 games. It's Ninjas in Pyjamas taking on Top Esports, and TES is going to pick up the 2-1 series win here. They're going to, you know, stay at the top of the Group Ascend standings despite what a lot of LPL fans want. I know that there are some Top Esports fans out there. Go you guys. I'm super excited that your team continues to be successful because they're playing out of their minds right now. They do have some issues. I'm not going to pretend like this is a perfect team by any means. Game number 2 was super sloppy, but game 1, game 3, they were both pretty consistent wins, I would say, overall for Top Esports, even if they got there in pretty drastically different ways. But for Ninjas in Pyjamas on the other side, they just collapse when they need to step up the most. You watch this game number 3 and you watch the way that they end up playing out. First of all, a draft that is very weird. Like, I think it's a little bit better than maybe people are going to give them credit for, because at least it has, like, agency, and I think that's really what I look for in a draft, is the ability to do something. But they get slaughtered in the early game and they have no way to play out the mid game, and all of a sudden things just start spiraling out of control for them. That's where Top Esports really thrive, and I think in game number 3 is where you saw the difference between where these two teams are at the moment. So we'll get into that, but player of the series for me, kind of up for debate. I think that there were 2 players I really considered here. I'm going to give it to Kanavi in the jungle. His Lilia game in game 1 was probably the single best game of this series, but it's not like he didn't perform incredibly well in the Pantheon in game number 3 either. I mean, it's just kind of Kanavi things at this point, right? This guy's running away with the MVP conversation, at least for me. I don't know if everybody else is kind of on the same page with that. Right now, it's a one-horse race. Like, there's going to have to be some real, like, late surges, we'll just say, for anybody to catch up with Kanavi in terms of where he's at in the MVP race for me. This guy has dominated the domestic split so far. He's had a couple of games every once in a while where he can get a little bit overpowered in the early game, where he can just look a little bit lackadaisical, but that, for the most part, is just him not being as locked in mentally. It has absolutely nothing to do with his skill level. When he is trying to win, he decimates games, and it becomes really easy for Top Esports to use that prio to be able to establish pressure everywhere else on the map. Again, the Lilia was excellent in game number 1, really gave Cream a lot to work with in the mid lane playing the Corki, not really a champion that's known for being as active as something like the Talia would be on the other side, but still did a good job in that regard. And then he kind of salvaged the game here in game number 3. I'm not going to say salvage, they ran that game, but him and Crisp paired up to be basically this unkillable duo throughout a lot of the mid game and really made a lot of of the mid-game problems that Top Esports theoretically would have with this comp a lot easier. So credit to Kanavi, he's going to get player of the series. If you wanted to give this to Crisp, I do kind of understand that. Man, that Braum game was good in game number 3. Really excited to see Crisp stay active and stay really aggressive. I'm a little bit sour on the Nico game in game number 2, which is why I'm kind of shying away from Crisp, but this is kind of the role he falls into. In the losses, he's going to look pretty bad because he's going to continue to stay aggressive and, look for a lot of these plays that aren't necessarily going to work out. And then in his wins, he's going to look great because he is really aggro and he does push tempo really well. But he's awesome on Braum. He's awesome on these champs that both have ways to disrupt the enemy, but also as a primary peel form for things like Ashe and things like the Pantheon in the late game. It's just good stuff. Crisp was awesome, especially in game number 3. The only real concern I had with Top Esports was that Cream was not very good. Again, Doenby was probably the better mid laner here. And I hate to say that this is starting to become concerning because Cream was awesome in winter and he was awesome in 2024. I've been a huge Cream defender over the course of the last year because I think he's way better than people think he is. He's gotten this reputation of being carried on this team, and I think that that is absurd when you watch any of the tape, not only from when they won the LPL in the winter split, but from last year as well. He's just not been in form, I would say, over the past couple of weeks. He's still been fine. Like, even out of form, he's like an average mid laner. Like, he's a good enough mid laner to survive at this level. It's just we kind of got used to Cream being a top 3 mid laner in terms of production, and that's just not really been there. He had a really bad Azir game in game number 2, and I think that is kind of like tainting my thoughts on him a little bit, but he's had a couple of these bad games over the past couple of weeks. Hopefully he can lock it in a little bit more. 369 continues to perform like one of the best top laners in the league. Shanji really put on his working pants today, though, because he absolutely showed up and played really well, and Jackie Love is also fine, but Top Esports really had Kanavi and Crisp show out. At least in my opinion, Kanavi was definitely kind of the main facilitator here, and he is, like I said, running away with MVP. And then for Ninjas in Pyjamas on the other side, there are a lot of positives to take away from this. Shanji does seem to be getting into form. He was pretty good at the end of last week, and it seems like he's carried that over. 369 is not an easy opponent to go into, and Shanji more than held his own. That Scion game in game 2 was really solid, but he was just good throughout a lot of this series. Excited to see that he's found a style of being more of a tank top lane player, and he's starting to embrace that a bit more and play well because of it. Aki still has his own problems, but he wasn't quite as bad as he was in last week, in my opinion. Dud of the series for me, though, is going to go to a player that I thought played really well in their win, and that's Leave, who's actually going to get this mostly for game 1 and game 3. He was awful in their losses, like truly atrocious, and we've seen this out of Leave. He's kind of the Crisp, but 480 carry, where in their wins, where he's enabled and when he's set up in a really nice position, he is able to kind of take over a lot of those games and perform really well. But when he's not in that position, when he has to play Ziggs in game 3 and play weak side, he's like genuinely one of the worst AD carries in that role in the entire world. It's really funny how he just cannot function really as a weak side bot laner. Overall, I think Leave is better than he has been in the last couple of years, but the weaknesses that he showed last year definitely are not completely fixed here on Ninjas in Pyjamas. But I would be remiss to mention that the rest of Ninjas in Pyjamas was also pretty garbage in that game, number 3 in particular, where they all just kind of got run over. That Leona in particular from PP God was really bad. Aki didn't have any pressure. Doenby was the only player on this team attempting to do anything in that game number 3. I also don't really have an issue with how Shanji ended up playing it out. The solo laners were not my issue with Ninjas in Pyjamas, but Aki continues to be a liability in the jungle. Kanavi definitely took advantage of that. And Leave and PP God are not a bot lane that I expect to be able to go up against the best teams in the LPL consistently. I do think that there are going to be moments where you can splash in some tape every once in a while, but I don't think if you're looking at a game-to-game, like going throughout a playoff series or anything like that, I'm going to expect Leave and PP God to be one of the better bot lanes or anything like that. That means you're relying a ton on Doenby in the mid lane, and this was always the problem with Ninjas in Pyjamas, is that if Leave is not going to be a top 3 to 4 AD carry, this team has no chance of being able to make MSI or make Worlds or be in the top 4 or anything like that. They just have too many flaws elsewhere, and Top Esports was able to take advantage of that. Kanavi is in unbelievable form. I think the rest of this team is also playing really well. 369's been awesome this split. Crisp is in good form right now. Cream has kind of gotten off of the good form a little bit, but I do think that he, it just takes one game, takes one series for him to get back into it, and I think obviously just getting him on more comfort picks will help overall. But Top Esports is still the team to beat. I kept them at number 1 in my power rankings after last week, and I feel pretty vindicated here. Then moving on now to day number 4, our middle day here in the LPL in week number 4, and we had a matchup between Weibo Gaming and Team WE kick us off on day number 4, and once again, WE is going to pull off a pretty shocking upset, a very big victory for them. I don't think a lot of people saw this coming, but I can't really say I'm all that surprised in terms of the current form of either of these two teams. Weibo Gaming is notoriously inconsistent. This is the exact type of series that they just come up and lose in, and WE has been on fire, and once again, we win. We continue to win over and over again. The most fun team in the world picks up another victory, and honestly, I really have to start saying it, Taiyun's starting to really impress me as a player. Like, the development, the scrim version of Taiyun that we had always heard rumors about, that we always knew was in the pipeline somewhere, he has finally come to the surface. He has finally found that confidence on the stage, and it's really working. He's gonna get player of the series here. I don't even think there's gonna be anybody that really disputes that. Really great stuff from him, and honestly, he's been on fire over the past couple of weeks. Last week, he was already really good for this WE team. I think that there were some moments that weren't quite as ideal. I remember he completely popped off in game 2, I want to say, against Top Esports, and then just completely shit the bed in game number 3, and so you do still get that dichotomy every once in a while, but honestly, through the first couple of games this week, he has been spectacular in their wins. I'm just shocked to see this development maintain itself. Like, I didn't think this guy was ever going to be playable at the LPL level, not because I think that, you know, the LPL is untouchable in terms of these players that have failed in the LCK. I think this is a pretty good landing spot for mediocre LCK players to come in and, like, really revitalize their careers and their reputations, but Taiyun was a mediocre player at the LCK Challengers League level. Like, he was a mediocre tier 2 player in Korea, so to see him come over here and struggle a lot early but figure things out, it's just kind of a credit to the development system. Not only of WE, but to Taiyun, like his ability to lock in and just get better and better over the course of time. Of course, him and Vampire have developed a nice chemistry. Vampire is still a little bit greedy, and I think when you're looking at their game 2 loss, you're maybe not seeing the best Poppy game you've ever seen played, but honestly, I'm willing to throw it aside because Era was also incredibly greedy. Vampire made some fantastic plays on Nico in particular in game number 1. The Leona game was not good, let's be entirely honest, but let's also kind of set the record straight and say that this is a pretty tough game to play Leona in. I do think that there are more, I guess, apologies for Vampire than any other player in the entire universe. More, I guess the term would be excuses for Vampire than almost any other player, at least in terms of social media, because people really just want this guy to be good. But at the end of the day, he was probably the weak link of the team. Taiyun was more isolated in terms of why that bot lane ended up winning, and he did fantastic in the team fight stage. So credit to him. The development looks like it's real at the current moment, and Monkey continues his hot streak. This guy is so aggro, so aggressive in terms of how he wants to push a lot of the mid games and just the general tempo of the way this team plays, and I think it really does help WE out. They've gotten infinitely better ever since he came in to the jungle position. Now, I'm not saying that they wouldn't have had success if Tianjin was still here as the starting jungler, but what I am saying is that Monkey has made their team better. He is a better version of what Tianjin was supposed to offer this team at the beginning of the year. I did kind of like Monkey on EDG last year. If you go back and watch the weekly recaps, I didn't have a ton of expectations for him, obviously, coming into this year, but he has definitely exceeded those. Karis continues his hot form. Xiaohu was fine on the other side of this matchup, but Karis was fine. Like, he was good. He was going up against Xiaohu, who's in great form and holding his own, and that's all you can really ask for from someone like Karis. You just need to be good enough, and then obviously, Cube on the top side was totally fine overall as well. So for WE, it's just a really nice 2-1 victory. You picked up a big win over WE, and that's back-to-back victories for WE. You're sitting at a spot now where you're competing for like a top 7, top 8 spot, which is just ridiculous for where this team was at even just a couple of days ago. Really fantastic turnaround from them. But for Weibo on the other side, this is more so them crashing back down to earth. You can take the player out of the support position. You can't take the support position out of Weibo Gaming. Like, truly, it's a curse upon this organization that whoever is playing support for them is just going to be super inconsistent, and that includes Era, who is going to get dud of the series here. I think you can make the argument he was super valuable to their game number 2 on the Rakan, and I certainly can understand that, but the Nautilus, and especially the Braum in game number 3, were just not good enough. Vampire was the better support in this series, and I know Vampire's been improving and things have been getting better on that front, but Era cannot really allow that to happen. This is the thing people were, like, absolutely crucifying Hong for when he was playing as the starting support, was him not being able to step up and be consistent against these middle tier supports. I actually do think it's not a player problem. It is an organizational problem. It's a playstyle problem for this team. Xiaohu expects a lot from his support. Light expects a lot from his support because Light's really not all that active in the early game. Xiaohu really wants to roam around and make a lot of macro plays. That inherently is going to put the support at more of an opportunity to get caught out and to be by themselves and in a bad position to die, isolated. We saw it with Crisp last year. We saw it with Hong at the beginning of this year, and we're seeing it with Era in this series. When it works, it's going to look really good, but I still think it's a pretty crazy thing to say that Hong's, out of character performances over the beginning part of this year should define who he is as a player rather than what he has shown over the last 4 years where he's been an all-pro caliber support. Weibo Gaming, it's much more of a culture thing. It's much more of a playstyle thing than it is an individual player, but I still got to give dud of the series to Era because he still was the biggest flaw in the same way that I gave dud of the series to Hong when he was underperforming in that way. I think you can also look at Tian, who really has just not been that guy this year. I've been very surprised by how not impressive Tian has been. We've been waiting for him to find that form, but it's just not happened. Like, Kanavi took a spot on Top Esports, which was not the spot that, Kanavi was expected to have. I think by all accounts, Tian was supposed to be starting for LNG, or that, Top Esports was really pursuing bringing him back, but he ended up choosing Weibo Gaming. Kanavi was like the backup plan for Top Esports, and he has been infinitely better. Tian has not been anywhere close to his 2024 form. Breathe continues to be fine, and Xiaohu was not good, but I wouldn't say he was bad here. Light is the same player in every single series. Not really much to talk about there, but Weibo is just inherently inconsistent. Once again, when you rely so much on being able to move around the map through the middle with players like Xiaohu on things like Ryze and Talia and, making their waves on that front, and your jungler's not playing well and your support's too far forward, it's just not going to work out, and that's just how the cookie crumbles, and WE was there to take advantage of it. The encouraging thing is not that WE beat Weibo, is that they're good enough to be able to take advantage of Weibo's mistakes. I think, if you had asked me a month ago, I wouldn't have expected WE to even have the skill to be able to take advantage of something like this, but they did it, and they're on top, and that's 2 straight wins. This team is on fire right now, and I'm excited to hopefully see it continue. Then moving on to our second series of day number 4, and boy, did we get a spicy one here. It was Anyone's Legend taking on JD Gaming, and JDG is going to pick up the 2-0 series win. It's a sub 30-minute win in both Game 1 and Game 2. They dominated both of these games, and honestly, I'm really not all that surprised. It just gets, back to the formula that we talked about for JD Gaming. Everything is super predictable when it comes to this team, and for AL, obviously a lot went wrong here, a lot that's not been very consistent for this team. I think they ended up getting really greedy with some of their drafts throughout this series, but, this can happen every once in a while. You can have a bad game. It's a long regular season, but this is the thing for JD Gaming that I really want to specify. When this team is on, when Shun, Scout, and Pays are all playing really well, and Ala and Missing just aren't running it down throughout the entirety of the series, this team can beat anybody in the LPL. It's the reason that I've kept them at number 3 in my power rankings. It's the reason that I felt so good about this team for a majority of the year, is because their best version of League of Legends is better than almost anybody else's best version of League of Legends. That includes your other flippy teams like Invictus Gaming that everybody wants to hype up. JDG is the optimal version of what the best team in the LPL can look like. They just never bring it out at a consistent level, but man, when it looks good, it looks really freaking good. Like I said for AL, this is a pretty uncharacteristic performance from them. I think they will bounce back just fine moving forward. I'll talk especially about why I'm not concerned about this, but for JDG, player of the series is going to go to Pays. I'm tired of singing Pays' praises, a very fun sentence that I was excited to say on the channel, but I digress. Pays has been unreal throughout the entirety of this year. I have continuously called him easily the number 180 carry in the LPL. I will continue to stand by that take. I don't even think it's really all that close right now. Hope has been phenomenal. Like, his form has been right up there with Pays' in terms of what he's been able to do over the course of 2025, but in terms of raw talent, who I would take right now of all the LPL 80 carries, I'm taking Pays. I think this guy does everything at an elite quality level. The Jhin in Game 1, the Xayah in Game 2. I can get behind the idea that, oh, Ala created a lot on the Sion in Game 2 and things were a lot easier because of that. Scout's Ryze was incredible in Game number 1. Shun got Neferi. Missing was a playmaker on things like Nico and Nautilus. Like, I get that this was more of a team effort, but it Pays not being a part of this puzzle makes this team way weaker, and so the fact that they have him immediately makes them one of the best teams in the LPL. That's genuinely just how highly I view this guy, because he can do everything. He's not the most dominant laner in the world. That's really the only weakness he has, is 2v2. He's never really going to be able to separate himself from, like, the other great 80 carries. He's just in the mix with all of them, but as a team fighter, he's the best 80 carry in the region, and one of, if not the best 80 carry at team fighting, specifically in the world. Him and Aiming, I think, are really the two that kind of stand above everybody in that phase of the game, but Pays has been so consistent over the past 3 years at being able to dominate games in that regard. Again, I get that other players on this team get resources for him, but there are no players in this league that pay out those resources as consistently and as easily as FaZe is going to be able to do that. But here's what happens when Scout plays well, when he goes out and outplays a player like Shanks. All of a sudden, the game looks a lot easier for JD Gaming. Again, Scout's such a big piece of the puzzle for JDG in the same way that FaZe is kind of the consistent piece. Scout is the inconsistent piece. When it works, this team is unbeatable. Scout's rise was unreal in game number 1. His Yone was still very good in game number 2. If he's just gapping his lane opponent, this team is almost impossible to beat because the Scout FaZe carry duo is the best in the entire league when everything is clicking. So love to see that. All I had a great series here, especially on the Sion in game 2. Like him a lot more on the tanks, very similar to the conversation we had earlier this week about Shanji, where a player who's struggling, just put him on Ornn, put him on Sion, put him on those things, get him comfortable playing the game again, because it's so different, no lane swaps, you just got to focus a lot more on the 1v1. You know, give him something that can really just stabilize in the early game and let them do the things they're good at. You gave Shun Neferi, which is a huge mistake, and he obviously capitalized on that. This guy still is way better than he gets credit for, and missing was even fine in this series. JDG just are dominant when they are clicking. Scout and FaZe are unstoppable when it works, and that kind of showcased itself here. And for AL, again, this is a pretty uncharacteristic series from them. I'm not going to sit here and say that I don't think it's possible for this to happen again, but Tarzan just doesn't play like this. He's going to get done of the series. People hate Tarzan. I understand. I've been a Tarzan defender for a very long time. I'm going to see some comments, not only here, but on Reddit, that's like, oh, Tarzan choking again. First of all, random regular season game in week 4, not necessarily calling that the most gigantic choke opportunity, but I do want to point out the Reddit comment that I saw that essentially was like, oh, Tarzan's in quarterfinals form of Worlds already. Are we so brain dead that we forgot that this guy was the best player on a team that went to the semifinals of Worlds last year, like 6 months ago? It's not even been a full year since that happened. Are we so far deep down the rabbit hole of just randomly AFK hating LPL junglers that we've forgotten that that's the case? Both of these junglers succeeded heavily at Worlds this past year, and I guess we just don't want to remember that. But at the end of the day, Tarzan's going to have some games every once in a while that you're not in love with. I still love Tarzan as a player. This is super out of character for him. I think he's going to be just fine. Flandra ends up picking Nidalee on the top side. This is something that I think is exclusively hubris and greed, as I've talked about on the channel before. Shanks had a really bad series, almost an underratedly bad series, especially that game 1 on Galio. He was entirely useless in that game. Scout completely outplayed him. Kale was good. Hope was fine. I certainly don't have a huge issue with the bot lane. I don't think they were the issue here, but, when AL's not going to be playing up to their own standard and JDG is going to be getting into form, that series all of a sudden stops being close. JDG at their best and AL at their worst, it's heavily in favor of JDG. I think both of these teams at their best is a very interesting conversation that I hope we get to see at some point. We saw it in Winners Finals last split where AL won it, kind of, because Scout was okay in that series. Shun was okay in that series, but I'm excited to see that JDG at least still has this in him. I was starting to get concerned after the past couple of weeks, but they definitely reassured me here. Then moving on now to day number 5, and we kick day 5 off with a very interesting clash now between Team WE and FunPlus Phoenix. That WE is yet again going to pick up a victory, and that's a 3-0 week for WE here in Group Ascend. Say it ain't so. I didn't think this was going to be possible for this team. I get that FPX isn't exactly the strongest of competition, but they've also kind of been on their own little individual hot streak as of late, and here we are. We win again. We continue to win. It just piles on and on and on. I cannot be more excited for this team. For FunPlus on the other side, they are who we thought they were. This team has a couple of really nice moments. I think the Nico from Jue in game number 2 was gorgeous, and I think they play around playmakers like that incredibly well, but when you have to get Assume into a position where he has to play something that isn't super easy to I shouldn't say Draven's easy to execute on. That's not accurate, but straightforward, something very straightforward to execute on. He just instantly becomes a worse player, and I think it's very easy to see. We'll talk about his games 1 and 3 that were both really tremendously awful in my opinion, but let's get into WE first and foremost. Player of the series, it's going to Vampire, baby. I know a lot of people have been waiting on this one. A lot of people have been waiting for a Vampire player of the series, and I'm here to give the people what they want. I'm here to give people Vampire praise. I'm not turning around my entire opinion on this guy just yet. I understand he's very popular and very fun to cheer for at the current moment, and I get it. Like, it's super fun to watch him play the game now that he's starting to have some confidence, now that he's getting his footing under him in terms of how he wants to play out a lot of these mid games, but I don't think he's a perfect player just yet. Go watch that game number 2 for a good instance as to him getting completely outplayed in the support position by Jue. But at the end of the day, if he's going to step up in that game 3 on the Rel, then he's going to step up in that game 3. If Taiyun's going to be able to take over on the Ashe and do a ton of damage with perfect positioning throughout a lot of the back half of this game, and if this bot lane is going to continue to be a really big positive for this team overall, then that's just how things are going to go. The Nautilus in game number 1 was also exceptional from Vampire, and the consistency across the whole series is why he is getting that. Taiyun was very good. I don't think he was individually as standoutish as Vampire was, and so I leaned in favor of Vampire there, but a lot of people are going to be looking at Monkey because his wins were incredibly strong. The Nefiri in game 3, even the Pantheon to a lesser extent in game number 1, but I just can't give it to him after that Zed game in game number 2 that went horrendously wrong. Zed Jungle has really started to pick up some steam again in professional play. Maybe we leave that one on the sidelines if we're not super confident that we can pull it off, but at the end of the day, the Nefiri looked excellent for Monkey, and, you know, an underrated part of this team that I didn't really mention a ton in the preseason or really throughout this split at all is the connection that Monkey and Vampire have. Like, they've played together before. These two very clearly felt comfortable together coming into this split. I think you can see that in the results, but I think this was the first series where it felt like, oh, Monkey and Vampire have great chemistry. Like, they play off of each other very well. They have great communication. They're clearly on the same page all the time. This was really the first series where it, like, very much showed on tape. So I'm really excited for that. Karis continues to be much better than he has been at any point in his entire career up until this point. This is easily the best stretch he's ever been on. Cube was pretty good in this series. I don't really have any complaints for WE. I get that game 2 wasn't exactly ideal, but the Zed just kind of was bad, and the game was kind of lost at that point. Outside of that, everything kind of going right for them. This team is just winning at the current moment, and you gotta be excited for them. And then for FPX on the other side, this is still a fine team. I think that there are a couple of performances here that I really liked. Sheer continues to be really good on the top side. His Gwen in game 2 was really fun to watch. We already talked about Jue on the Nico, and I think Assume was fine in that second game, but Assume is also going to be getting my dud of the series here. This might be a bit controversial, but in the same way that I pointed at Gala in that series earlier this week for Invictus Gaming and kind of talked about how he was just playing out of his mind in terms of the positioning, that's like the perfect game to study if you want to try and like learn what the mentality for an AD carry should be in a lot of those fights, because the way he played it out on Misfortune was just so gorgeous. I think this is a great example of the KDA might make it feel like he was relevant in these games. Go watch his positioning, go watch his actual play. This guy is just not good. He does not have a great understanding of where he needs to be at any given time. And I get that Taiyun's been on a hot streak, but for Assume to be by far the weaker AD carry in a series like this is pretty unacceptable. I've been pretty disappointed by Assume throughout this entire year. I think he is playing worse than he has at any point, and I've already been lower on Assume. Trust me, I don't like being a hater. I know that's kind of contrary to what people think down in the comments, but I don't really like, hating on a player or saying that they're not good. That's the part of the job that isn't fun. But when I think a player is underperforming and that it's not being talked about enough, I'm gonna call it out. And I think Assume is just not a very good AD carry, and I think that continues to get proven. Now, Care had some problems this series. Shadow certainly had some problems in this series. FPX is not a complete team by any metric, but I think Assume is the weakest link of anybody right now, maybe outside of like Hoya and Satab in the entirety of Group Ascend, which is really not a great place to be, and I don't think the team is good enough around him to be able to consistently make up for it. Now, that being said, Sheer and Jue are in great form. They're the best players on this team. Shadow has been pretty good across Group Ascend. I think Care has been pretty decent across Group Ascend. If they just get average performances out of Assume, we see that they can win. It just didn't happen here. And then for WE, like I said, very big victory, but what a week overall for this team. Just excited to see them actually have some confidence for the first time, maybe ever, for some of these players. It's the best almost all of them have ever looked in their entire career, and it's all happening at the same time. You just got to be stoked for this team at the moment. Then moving on to the second series of day number 5, and it's a very dominant outcome here with Ninjas in Pyjamas taking on Bilibili Gaming, and BLG is going to pick up the 2-0 win. They look good once again against a team that they should be beating, but it's not about the teams they should be beating, it's about the teams that they've been losing to. That's concerning me for BLG, that's concerning in general for BLG. They come out here and look pretty solid. I think all things considered, this was a very clean series from them. I think there were a couple of things they could have done better. Knight really didn't have the best series of his entire life. He's not been in the best form over the past couple of weeks. Not to say he's been in awful form or anything like that. I just think it could be better. And then, of course, Wei has not been very good at all in any of their losses, really in a lot of their series in general. Wei and On have negative chemistry playing together. Reminds me a ton of Pioshik and Life over in the LCK. They just can't really seem to get on the same page, but it does work out here in their win over NIP because they're even more dysfunctional at the current moment. I think there are pretty easy fingers to point in terms of where things kind of went wrong for Ninja Ninjas in Pyjamas in this one, but I will say, I think we're starting to get to the point where there is too much of a scapegoat on this team and that we're kind of ignoring the real core issues with how NIP are playing that will hold them back against actual good teams at this level. So let's go ahead and talk about it, as we always do here. On is going to get my player of the series. Anybody who watched these two games is going to agree with that. He was the guy for Bilibili Gaming in terms of everything that they ended up creating, everything that they ended up playing through. He was the one to kind of drive a lot of the momentum and the narrative through a lot of the early and the mid game, and it's nice to see On back on track. He's not been great over the past couple of games, but once again, shout out to LPL fans because they have the memories of Goldfish. They can only remember back to 1 week. I saw a lot of people being like, On's been so bad over the course of this year or this split, or they just generalize a lot of statements like that because he'll have 1 or 2 bad games and all of a sudden he's been playing bad. On was exceptionally good in the placement stage. He was actually unreal, and a big reason why I felt Bilibili got better from the winter split, why I put them back at like number 2, I think, in my power rankings going in to Group Ascend. Obviously, that didn't end up lasting because On wasn't great in week 3, but On's not been bad in the spring split. I feel like that is such a ridiculous take to have. This guy is still the kind of pivotal piece for Bilibili in terms of connecting the dots. Him and Wei just need to be good enough on the same page to be able to win series like this, and they were here. Of course, Wei was fine. You're giving over Jason, Nefiri, Callista, Nico on red side, even Knight's Ash, which he's basically undefeated on, so not really a great draft phase for Ninjas in Pyjamas in game number 2. I think that's been pretty well documented, but, you know, On was able to take advantage of it. Wei was able to take advantage of it on the Nefiri. I think Elk had a pretty decent series. Bin continues to get better game over game. Bin really struggled out of the gate. I think a lot of the negative attention that's been on probably should be on Bin. I think that that's more so where I think a lot of the negativity has come in. For me, for Bilibili Gaming, Knight's not necessarily been up to his own standard. He's certainly not been bad, but he's just not been the best player in the region, which we've gotten super used to from him. Wei is not good, but I think that is pretty well documented. And Bin has been like the 5th best top laner in the LPL so far in terms of production, which is really not very Bin-like. I guess it kind of is in the regular season if you go back, you know, to the beginning parts of his career. But again, there's just a lot of things to tweak and fix here on Bilibili. My whole point to take away from this is that I don't really think anything changes, in my opinion, from this series. I don't think my thoughts and opinions on Bilibili and how they're constructed really is altered in any way by them showing me that this is here. We know that this is here. We know they can beat up on teams that they are better than. The problem is they can't beat teams that they're not better than inherently mechanically. So that's still an issue. And Ninjas in Pyjamas, unfortunately for them, they're just not at the line that you need to hit. You need to be this tall to ride the ride. They're not this good to be able to face Bilibili Gaming. That's unfortunately a little bit of a barrier that they've run into. Doenby is a good player, and I do think there's a lot of positives that come with Doenby individually as a player, but let's not pretend this guy's like actually just been good the entire year or the entire split, or that there's not been any sort of negatives. I don't think he was the problem in this series, and we'll get to where I think the problems lie, but this guy is not the consistent piece that's hard stuck on Ninjas in Pyjamas like Reddit would make you out to believe. He has bad games. He has games where he's completely inactive out of the middle of the map. As much as we can criticize how Knight played some of these fights, at least Knight was in the fights and moving around. Doenby can sometimes just get a little bit lazy, quite frankly, in terms of how things go, especially when his team is not playing well, when the team is on the back foot. Like, he's a very emotional player, and sometimes that comes out with him just not trying as hard in a game 2 after they get blown out in a game number 1, and it keeps happening. Shanji, I think, has gotten better. He was probably the best player on the team in this series, which is never really a great sign when you're 7, 9, and 8 on Sion and Rumble. Aki's gonna get my dud of the series, but I think, again, one of the big things I want to highlight on, I think Aki's becoming more of a scapegoat than he is, like, actually a player that I really hate at this point. Aki is not good, and I want to make that clear. I don't think he is an upper tier jungler. I don't think he's somebody that is going to help Ninjas in Pyjamas get where they want to be. He's going to be a player that, if he's in Group Ascend, is going to be fighting it out for being the worst jungler in Group Ascend. But he's far from the only problem on this team, and it's not Shanji on the top side right now that's the issue. Leave and PP God continuously get worse, series over series, and the scorelines, the KDAs, they're not going to tell you that, but Leave is way too far forward. He's starting to play like Edward Gaming Leave again, where he's just walking up and dying for no reason at 15 to 20 minutes every single game. PP God has, quite frankly, just not been good at all over the past couple of weeks. It's been really frustrating to watch this bot lane, which was a big strength for Ninjas in Pyjamas, get worse and worse and worse, and this was the reason that I didn't have any faith or trust in this team, not only going into the year, but going into this split, even after the winter split, because I didn't think that Leave and PP God could put together an entire year of consistent league play, and unfortunately, that's kind of proven to be true. They're too greedy, too aggressive, and they get punished too regularly against good teams. On had a masterclass here, because Leave and PP God were basically handing it to him on a silver platter. Now, again, I want to reiterate, Aki's Skarner game was the worst game of the series. It's why he's getting dud of the series, but Aki's Pantheon game, really not all that bad. Leave and PP God were much worse in game number 1. So and IP have a lot of problems. That's the point that I want you to take away from this. Not that I hate Leave and PP God and I love Aki, just that this is a much more well-balanced negative team than I think people give them credit for. The problems are coming from everywhere. It's not just one player who's bringing them down. And then for Bilibili, great. You beat Ninjas in Pyjamas, who's really struggling to find consistency. That's awesome, man. You're the 5th best team in the LPL right now, and that's super below expectations. It's all well and good to be able to pick up a series win here. You got to do it more consistently against teams that are better than this. Then moving on now to day number 6, and we're going back down to Group Nirvana for an Edward Gaming versus Ultra Prime matchup, where Ultra Prime is going to pick up a very big victory, 2-1 win for them. Here they end up pitching a shutout in game number 1. No deaths on their side. Obviously, they can't keep that up, a 26-minute loss in game number 2, but they make it worth their while in that 3rd and final game. A couple of takeaways here that I think are really important. First off, just by this result, Ultra Prime feeling much better about their position. I think after their loss to LNG last week, there was some concern that perhaps this team wasn't quite as safe as they thought they were coming in to this stage, being the team that was the closest to making Group Ascend of any team in Group Nirvana. Well, I think they settled a lot of those doubts here with this Edward Gaming win. They're certainly not guaranteed anything, although, you know, it's getting dangerously close at this point, but beating up on one of the better teams in the group is a great sign, and EDG is a team that was expected to be near the top and has been near the top of Group Nirvana. That being said, they have a very pivotal weakness that they just can't seem to overcome right now on the top side of the map, and it's just going to consistently hold them back. It doesn't matter how good their AD carry played in this series, because On was exceptionally good. This was easily his best game so far back on Edward Gaming. It doesn't really matter what their jungler does, because Xiao Hao's been awesome over the course of Group Nirvana just in general. If they're going to have a top side that's going to lose as consistently as ZDZ loses, it's going to be nearly impossible to win games at a consistent level. So we'll go ahead and talk about it, because top lane is kind of the order of discussion here, because player of the series for me is going to go to Jung on the top side. Boy, am I excited to see him actually step up and have a good series here for Ultra Prime. I was super high on this kid coming into the LPL this year. I thought his PCS tape was phenomenal, and honestly, I was looking at him as a potential breakout star. You know, he wasn't all that dissimilar to what You Should Know Me was as a prospect when he came in a couple of years ago, but I think he was better in the PCS. Like, he was better in his domestic region before coming over to the LPL, even if I don't think he's shown the same kind of flashes that You Should Know Me showed when he was here in the LPL just yet. I still think it's there. Mechanically speaking, this guy is an absolute menace, and honestly, you can look at all 3 games here. Jung was the better top laner by a large margin. Now, ZDZ certainly isn't the biggest piece of competition in the entire universe. We've seen what that guy can do with resources, which is nothing, and he certainly does nothing without them either, but it is nice to see that Jung can win if given the opportunity, and he did it on Sion, where he was super useful, and he was great on Jace in game number 3. I think that really sealed it for me for player of the series. I definitely consider Junhao. He was the other player that I think a lot of people are going to point out. The Pantheon in particular in game 3 was everywhere on the map. I love these more macro-oriented comps for a team like Ultra Prime that does have good macro in Group Nirvana, because a lot of the teams at this level are just kind of relying on being able to get advantages in the early game. If you're playing things like Pantheon and Ryze, it can start to take over in the mid game. That's really going to separate you. That's what I thought made Ultra Prime better than a lot of teams at this level, or project better than a lot of the other teams at this level, at least in my opinion. So credit to Junhao. He continues to get Nefiri, series in and series out. Every team just wants to give this to Ultra Prime. They always win on this champion. Not always, but most of the time they win when they get this champion. Very strange to see them continue to get it, but I digress. Moving on to the rest of the team, Wako's continuing to get into better form. He was awesome on the Ezreal in game 1. Saber, I thought, was totally fine in the series, did exactly what he was supposed to do. Xiaoxia is continuing to be a facilitator, mostly for Junhao in the jungle. Ultra Prime have a very clear style, a very clear way that they want to play the game, and I think it continues to really benefit them. And then for Edward Gaming on the other side, it really is as simple as ZDZ just being an absolute albatross for them. On the top side, he is the noose that's dragging down the rest of this team, and I want to pitch this question to you, and this is going to be mega flame, so I do apologize, but how much money has Xiao Hao made ZDZ across his entire life? Like, how much money has ZDZ made that is entirely because Xiao Hao is a really good jungler and wanted to play with him on the top side of the map? Because that just has to be what it is at this point. Xiao Hao keeps getting job opportunities on multiple different teams, and he's like, I want to play with my guy ZDZ. I wanted to play with him on Anyone's Legend. I wanted to play with him on Weibo Gaming. I wanted to play with him here on Edward Gaming. Like, no matter where I go, this this guy's going to be my top laner, and yet every single time ZDZ continues to disappoint. This guy's just not good. He was the reason that this team isn't in Group Ascend. You can watch the final placements episode of the Spring Split for me to kind of figure out if you want my exact opinion on that. ZDZ really cost Edward Gaming in that regard in the last chance qualifier, but look at this series. This was super winnable. On played great in this series, easily the best he's played since coming back to Edward Gaming. He's kind of been a bit of a weak link for the team so far. This was not that from him. Angel, very solid in the mid lane. Xiaohao is very aggressive in the jungle, and Junhao was very good, but he didn't exactly give over a ton, and Wink was creating. It was just negative pressure on the top side of the map. When Jiang was winning every single game in lane, it became a 4v5, a 6v4, if you will, throughout a lot of this series, and that, EDG is not a good enough team to overcome that, so... Overall, you gotta feel unfortunate for EDG. You gotta feel a bit disappointed by what they've turned into. I think they're gonna be fine. They're gonna survive the bottom 2 curse, but they might not be a top 2 team. They might not get a chance to play a best of 5 to get themselves into playoffs. They wanted that at the bare minimum, considering where the talent level of this team is at, and I'm just not sure that's gonna be there, because Ultra Prime is in a pretty good spot to take that now, and LGD has started off this stage incredibly well. LNG has gotten a lot hotter as of late. Things are not guaranteed for anybody. In Group Nirvana, it's become a bit of a bloodbath outside of the bottom 2 teams, but that makes it a lot more fun, and Ultra Prime has definitely reinserted themselves into that conversation. Then moving on to our second series of day number 6, and a pretty predictable outcome here. JD Gaming taking on Thunder Talk Gaming, and JDG is going to pick up the 2-1 series win. They didn't really have a lot of trouble with this series. The top side of the map ended up popping off for JDG, which is a really good sign because it's not always clicking for them, but I want to reiterate, basically everything we've already said this week, which is JDG good when they are good. When this team is actually comfortable and playing up to their own standard, they're one of the best teams in the world. I think that has become very clear over the beginning part of this year, and they can win through multiple avenues. It's not just pays, but most of the time it's pays. It just didn't have to be in this series, which is always a good thing. And then for Thunder Talk on the other side, this team, they're fine. Like, they have a couple of things going for them. You live by Satab and you die by Satab, which was very clear here in this series. They decided, screw that Beishuan stuff. I'm so tired of letting him dictate whether or not we get to win games or lose games or whatever. It's time for Satab to be the one to step up and determine whether or not we get to win or lose. And he won you game 2 and he insta-lost you games 1 and 3. So it just is what it is. You live by Satab, you die by Satab in the mid lane. We'll talk about it. But for JDG, player of the series is very obviously Shun. Like, I didn't have to think about this really even a little bit. This guy dominated both of their wins in this series. The Neferi game in game number 1 was obvious. The Jarvan game in game number 3 was slightly less obvious, but still very good from him. He was definitely the main guy on the team, though, in terms of either setup or follow through, depending on what his role was in any individual game. I'm a big fan of Shun. I've been a big fan of this guy for basically his entire playing career at a top level. The Invictus time frame that he had, I thought he was really good. Zika was the one player on that team that got promoted that I was more concerned about, but Shun was the player I was kind of pounding the table for back on those really bad Invictus Gaming teams. He goes to Bilibili Gaming. Everything really works out for that team. They go to World Finals. They're competing at the top level, and then the offseason happens. And I get that BLG wanted to go in a different direction with Wei. I get that there's some offseason drama, and I know that there's probably more to the story. There's rumors that Shun was trying to, poach Knight and Elk and On away from the team to go somewhere else, and so Bilibili was like, nope, you're out of here. Like, we are not going to even put up with that a little bit. But even then, like, my strategy would be, let's convince Shun that he actually would rather be here on this org instead of taking this org that we already have and bringing it somewhere else. I think that is a totally valid strategy that probably would have ended up working out. But Shun ends up being, left behind by Bilibili. He goes over to JD Gaming here, and he has been very good for this team. Significantly better than what someone like Wei or, obviously someone like Beishuan has been for Thunder Talk. Shun has been more consistent than he gets credit for. I think the wins that don't necessarily involve him are a little bit more like background noise stuff from him, but that's good to show that he can do that at a relatively high level. I think that there were some concerns that he was never going to be a great facilitator. I think he's been a great facilitator this year. He's obviously a great carry, and the Jarvan game was very flashy. Like, it can work out. Shun's a very good player, and the rest of this team stepped up here too. Ale had another really good series on the top side. A series against Hoya will definitely be one of those get right series for a lot of top laners in Group Ascend right now, because his mechanics are just not good enough to be able to keep keep up in any circumstance. He ends up picking Vladimir, Yorick, Galio in 3 games. Yeah, Ale had a pretty easy time being able to generate some leads, but specifically on the Rumble in game number 3, he really ended up popping off. Probably the best game he's played in the spring split. Scout was totally fine. I think people are going to overreact to that game 2 on Azir. He was great in game 1 and game 3. Paze is super consistent, doesn't make any mistakes, didn't have to be the main character here, which is a good thing, and then missing was also fine as an engaged threat. Overall, it was the top side of the map that stood out for JDG, but it's the same story we've already talked about when it comes to this team. If they're playing well, they're going to do their thing, and they're going to be able to win. And for Thunder Talk, they're not going to be able to beat the good teams in Group Ascent. It's the same story we've talked about for them for quite a while, where they're just falling further and further down the pecking order, with teams like FPX and WE starting to perform well. Is Thunder Talk the 10th best team in the LPL right now? It's a pretty disappointing thing for, Thunder Talk to be going through, but they've kind of earned it in terms of their gameplay. They have the worst solo lane duo, maybe in the entire league. It's certainly within the realm of possibility. Hoya is unplayable on the top side. We've gone in depth on that, but how can Dud of the series not go to Satab in the mid lane? Like, how is it anybody else? I get it, man. He carried game number 2. He was awesome in that second game. But when you solo lose games 1 and 3, specifically game 1 on the Yone, you're Dud of the series. Like, it just doesn't matter. If your team ends up losing a series and you were the biggest piece in both of their losses, that's just how it ends up going. I don't really care what you did in that second game. So Satab is, what he is at this point. He's not a very mechanically talented mid laner. He's got a couple of things up his sleeve. He has no sense of macro. You don't want him getting out on the map and trying to make plays in that regard because he's just not very good in that role. But when he loses early, he has absolutely nothing to do on the map, and that happens very regularly against good talent at this level. He's just not very good. I think there are other players, obviously, you can point out. Hoya, we already mentioned, getting destroyed by Ale. I think 1xN has really declined in terms of some of his performances. The KDA wouldn't necessarily indicate that, but I don't think he was good at all in their 2 losses. Feather was, pretty mediocre, was not good on the Alistair in particular in game 1. Beishuan, whatever, outplayed by Shun, but it wasn't really his fault this time, which is a good thing for Thunder Talk. They usually live or die by him, but this team is just not talented enough to consistently be able to go up against these teams that are starting to figure themselves out. They had that big, push at the beginning of the year where they overperformed, but I think a lot of that was because the rest of the teams around them just didn't have a good identity and sense of what they were yet. Like, a lot of these teams have figured it out, and Thunder Talk has naturally regressed in that factor because of that. And then for JD Gaming on the other side, Shun has been great, Paze has been great, Scout was good this week, Ale and Missing are playing better. I just want to see this team stay good. This league is so much more fun if JDG is going to be very good near the top of the standings, at least for the back half here of week number 4. That did end up being the case. But that's going to bring us to day number 7, our final day here in week number 4, and it's a good one that we kicked it off with, a dominant win here. Ninjas in Pyjamas taking on anyone's legend, and AL gets some revenge for earlier on in the week. Their loss, of course, to JDG earlier on. They definitely got some revenge, some comeuppance in this series. They got some of their frustration out, I can definitely imagine, because this one was not close really at any point. Ninjas in Pyjamas just aren't a very good League of Legends team at this point, and I don't think there's a ton to talk about. I think this series just backs up a lot of what I've been saying, not only about, NIP, but about AAL, just everything kind of combined. So we'll go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series was kind of tough because Tarzan and Shanks were both so integral to the success of anyone's legend that it should go to both of them. This is kind of a co-player of the series. I'm not doing that because that's not how this channel operates, but in theory, that's how I would do this. I'm giving it to Shanks because the mid lane matchup was embarrassing for Doenby in game number 2, and I think Shanks should get some credit for that because he's not always the flashiest guy on this team. I talked about it in the winter split where oftentimes we're talking about Hope and Kale, especially this year, getting a lot of resources and being a big, positive piece, and then Flandra and Tarzan on the top side have definitely been like the 2 carries of the team. Definitely the 2 most noteworthy players, maybe outside of Hope, across this year. Shanks is kind of the player that blends into the background most of the time on AL, and I think that is a little bit unfortunate, but I think it's just the way that this team operates. I don't think it's anything against Shanks. I think he's done his role at a really high level. One of the things I was always concerned about for Shanks individually as a player was, can he be like option number 3 on a championship winning team? Because that's kind of what's going to be needed of him, not only here on AL, but just generally when you project out a team that wants to win the LPL. Shanks is probably not option 1 or option 2 on one of those teams, and he's not option 1 or option 2 here on AL. He really is option 3, but when he is asked to step up, he can do that, and when he is asked to kind of take a step back, he can do that as well. That's what I've been impressed by Shanks over the course of this year, because he really has been a resource carry for basically the entirety of his career. It's nice to see that he can play more of a facilitative role if need be, and then immediately step back into being a resource carry like he was in this series against NIP. Tarzan with a really nice bounce back series. We can sit there and criticize the Poppy game against JDG all day long, but get him on Pantheon, get him on Xin Zhao, out, get him on things that can skirmish early and create tempo, and all of a sudden things start to work out for him. Who is surprised to see Tarzan bounce back here? I certainly am not. Hope was exceptionally good once again here, just being able to capitalize and follow up on everything that Tarzan and Kale ended up creating, and, you know, Kale was back on the Poppy. Instead of putting that in the jungle, you put it down in the support position, and all of a sudden things ended up being a bit easier for AL to execute. Kale is one of the best Poppy support players in the entire world. I'm not surprised to see this go a lot better. Flandra was fine on the top side, certainly not the standout member here, but Shanks having a great series and gapping Doenby on the other side is great. Tarzan getting some, you know, nice recovery, bounce back games here against Aki is really nice, and Hope and Kale just kind of doing what they've been doing the entire year. Pretty predictable stuff by AL, and unfortunately, this is pretty predictable stuff by Ninjas in Pyjamas as well at this point. This is just who they are as a team, and I think there is reason to be disappointed by that, but we gotta live in reality, and the reality is that this team is just not very good right now. I think there have been some really good analysts to point out that, you know, they've been hurt more so than other teams by the lack of lane swaps. I think Shanji was actually not very good at lane swaps. It's something that I think really hurt his performance, but I think Doenby and Aki and Leave have really struggled to be able to get the same kinds of advantages in the ways that they did without lane swaps. It's kind of funny. Typically when you talk about that, you talk about the top laners, but NIP's entire like ideology in the winter split was kind of around getting Leave into the late game to be able to team fight with him and getting Doenby out on the map wherever he needs to be. That's just not doable anymore, at least not nearly as easily. Doenby pulls out the Lee Sin mid in game number 2 and completely feeds. Gets absolutely obliterated by Shanks and by Tarzan in that game, gets shut down very early on, and that champion becomes useless. Doenby is dud of the series here. Again, I'm going to continue to say this, like, Doenby has been underratedly not very good for this team. I know a lot of people want to say that he's hard stuck on Ninjas in Pyjamas. I think he's part of the problem right now. Now, obviously, he's had the best games of anybody on this team in terms of, like, adding wins. Maybe Leave is the only player you could even kind of argue in that direction in a positive way for NIP, but Doenby also has the worst games that this team has to offer, and he is such an emotional player. He rides the highs and the lows of where this team is at, that if they continue on a downward trajectory, I think that's going to hurt his play in the long term. So not great there. PP God had a really bad week, all things considered. Leave had a really bad week, all things considered. Watch this Zeri game in game 2. He was really bad in this game, and I get it. Like, Leave is a player that is inconsistent, but man, I have a hard time believing he's ever going to be one of the best AD carries in the LPL if he continues to just have moments like this, weeks like this, where he's not very good. He's going to be in the running for dud of the week when all is said and done. Trust me, like, you're going to see that. I'm not going to spoil anything right now, but it's definitely going to be in consideration for dud of the week. Aki was also not very good, got mega out jungled by Tarzan. At least he's active on the map. Shanji wasn't the problem, even if his scoreline would indicate that he was more of an issue here. Ninjas in Pyjamas just aren't a good team. Like, we just have to live in that reality. That's the truth. That's the reality right now, is that NIP have too many problems, too many holes, and AL took advantage of that. Shanks and Tarzan were incredible. Hope and Kale were incredible. AL's very complete. They didn't even need their top laner in this series, who's been the best top laner in the LPL in terms of production this year. AL is really clicking, and I'm really excited, and it's nice to see them bounce back after that unfortunate defeat earlier in the week. Then moving on to our second series of day number 7, and this one honestly just made me mad, so I hope you're ready for a rant. It's Weibo Gaming taking on Invictus Gaming, and Weibo is going to pick up the 2-1 series win. The two most inconsistent teams in the entire league having an inconsistent off, and Weibo ends up being the team to capitalize on that. They were better in this series, and it was not close, but man, I'm freaking tired of Invictus Gaming. And it's not just the losses, it's not the inconsistency. They tilted me super hard at the end of game number 2, just throughout almost all of game number 2, and then they have the nerve, the absolute gall to do the draft that they did in game number 3. Absolutely unreal. If you don't watch my other content, like if you're just an LPL watcher, I'll go into it here because I think it's worthwhile, but if you're picking Nidalee top, Caitlyn Elise bot in a game, you're trying to lose. You are actively win trading, and I honestly think you should be kicked from the team. And I'll talk about Mako because, boy, did Mako have one of the series of all time. I think this might actually be one of my least favorite performances I've ever seen in terms of like how much fun I had watching the game. I was just angry the whole time, and we'll get into it, but let's start with Weibo Gaming. Player of the series for me is going to go to Tion. Congratulations to him. He finally had a series where he looked pretty good here on Weibo. I'm happy to see that he's starting to find some level of form for this team, but You know, a lot of it was given over, I think, by Invictus. Jeje is a good player and did have at least a little bit of tempo. Rookie had a couple of good games, a couple of not so good games. Shout out the Rise in game number 3, but Tian still was mostly able to generate a lot of the tempo on his own. That Xin Zhao game is really what separated him in game number 2. I do think that there was a moment in game 3 where the Nocturne felt like it was starting to take over, but really, it was mostly the Orianna that was doing a ton of that. I think Era had a pretty good series as well, but Tian was definitely the player of the series for me, and I think it was about time that he finally started to step up. This was like the first time all year where I really was like, oh, this is the Tian I remember, where he's playing super greedy and he's trying to take everything on the map. I was really concerned for him because it didn't necessarily feel like he was just out of form. It more so felt like he had completely changed his playstyle coming over here to Weibo, and that's not what we wanted. We wanted to see the really greedy, really aggressive jungler, and I think we got a glimpse of that back here. Xiaohu continues to be in unbelievably good form in the mid lane. That Orianna game was gorgeous. It's so funny. I've continuously praised like Orianna performances, Azir performances, maybe not so much Azir, over the course of this split, but like Orianna has looked awesome in the LPL. Every single old school player that ends up picking up that champ in lieu of the new ones is working out. It's a positive for them. Rookie is the kind of player that should be playing things like Orianna more regularly because he looks way better on those champions instead of things like Rise, where it feels like he's not all that consistent. So, you know, shout out to Xiaohu, because I think he is still playing very well. Era had a pretty good series here, much better than he played in their middle series earlier. Again, when he's on, he looks pretty good. Specifically, the Braum game, I think in game 2 was a standout, but the Renata was still good as well. Breathe and Light were also solid, but this series is not about Weibo Gaming. We're done talking about Weibo. We gotta talk about Invictus, because seriously, I don't know if I've ever been more tilted than I was watching Invictus try to play out this game. There were so many things that had me like actually almost trying to scream at my screen. Like, it was just crazy. It started in game 2 when Mako took all the kills, because truly, like, he insta-lost his team the game by getting all the kills on Alistar. It was unwinnable from that point onwards, and it's like, okay, sometimes you just get unlucky, but go watch that game. Mako did not need to take all those kills, and he did. Like, it wasn't just, oh, Ignite ended up getting it. Mako, like, actively trolled his team in game number 2, and then you have the audacity to give me this draft in game number 3. Nidalee top, Viego Rise mid-jungle duo, Caitlyn Elise bot lane. It is like a perfect storm of everything I hate about how teams draft right now. Nidalee top, which is a counter pick that the Shy has utilized a couple of times. It worked once, and he actively lost his team solo the series twice on it last week. Great. Glad to see that be brought back out in the matchup against, oh, let me see, Ambessa, not Yorick, not any of these weird split pushers, Ambessa. Okay, great. Shout out the Shy. A really great decision for him there. And then you decide to pair that up, first off, with Elise support. If you don't know about my Elise support takes, like, you know, the LCK watchers are probably very familiar with this at this point, but this champ is ass. This champ does nothing at the pro level. You can only win on Elise support if you are so much better than your opponent that the champion does not matter. Because yeah, she gets an early lead and she can help enable Caitlyn in lane. What do they do after that? And barring that, what do they do if they lose? Do they just insta-lose the game? Turns out the answer to that is yes, by the way. But Elise has like a 15% win rate globally right now in terms of pro play. Do not pick this champ. Mako takes all the kills in game 2. He has the audacity to pick Elise in a series-deciding game number 3. You bet your ass he's dud of the series. Like, this is the easiest dud of the series I've ever given out. And I'm starting to get real mad at Mako, because this isn't even the first time that he's had some weird series so far. But it's not even the icing on the cake. The icing on the cake, first of all, Rookie playing Rise instead of trying to take anything a little bit more standard into the Orianna, because there are options available that people just aren't picking. It's Jeje on Viego being the only way to win this game. I mean, it is almost comical, man. Like, there is no other way that they ever win this game other than Jeje getting like a pentakill in the back half. This has got to be one of the drafts of all time. Like, it is really just insane. I hope you guys find it as funny as I do, because I can't. I actually stood there in disbelief watching them draft this when I was watching this series. But shout out to Invictus. They solo lost this series because of their incompetence, and they deserve to be, you know, the losers here. And Weibo Gaming had a pretty decent week overall. Of course, the loss to WE, not ideal, but at the very least, they were able to bounce back with a win here over IG, even if it wasn't entirely their creation. I still need to see more out of Weibo Gaming. I have no idea what to expect out of Invictus, but at the very least, this series made me mad and frustrated, and that's kind of the encapsulation of the LPL so far this year. But that's going to bring us to our final series of the week. An hour and a half into this video. I appreciate you guys who stick around for the ride. And it's a good one. It's Top Esports taking on LGD Gaming to close out week number 4. And Top Esports is once again going to get the job done. They're going to cement themselves at the top of the standings, at the top of the power rankings, at the top of the LPL with yet another victory, whether it's anyone's legend, whether it's LGD Gaming, whether it's Bilibili, whether it's, almost anybody who's been able to go up against Top Esports. No one has been able to crack the code consistently to be able to take them down, and once again, TES gets their way. They end up coming out on top, and they do it through the top lane, which is even more impressive. So we'll go ahead and go into it. 369 is going to get the player of the series for me. How could you possibly give it to anyone else? This was a dominant top lane performance, especially the later on we went into this series. Game number 1, okay, Ornn versus Sion, tank matchup. Okay, put 369 on Gwen. He can take over that matchup, even into Jax, who's not really able to ever get going on the top side of the matchup. And then, game number 3, the Ambessa looked pretty good. The nines were rolling today. I'll just say that. It was a great series from 369, and he has been playing like this. This isn't some sort of outlier. This isn't some sort of like, but 369 hasn't been, super consistent like we were talking about a lot over the course of last year. He's just really good right now. He's been one of the best top laners, not only in the LPL, but in the world in terms of the gameplay level that he's shown so far in 2025, and I, for one, am very excited. I hope he's able to keep it up. Him and Flandre have really been the two really impressive top laners for me so far in the LPL. I'm just, again, hopeful that the carry-oriented style that he's been able to really succeed on and be able to dominate it in these 1v1s, I hope that that's kind of more of what we can expect now that the lane swap meta is over from already a very talented player in 369. Kanavi continues to have some excellent games. He really stepped up when they needed him the most in game number 3 on the Xin Zhao, where he just had a tremendously good early game and basically put that game to rest as early as possible. Xun could not smite throughout the entirety of this series, and Kanavi definitely took advantage of that. Cream played what I would consider to be his best series in a little while. We were kind of talking about him as a player that had not been as clinical in the last couple of weeks. I still think Cream is a really big positive, but this was the series to kind of reiterate that. Give him Yone, give him obviously Akali, even if the Akali game wasn't the one I'm, really standoutish on, but the Rise in game 3, like all of it really just kind of ended up working for me for Cream. Crisp had a great series. He had a great week. Overall, it's going to go a bit undervalued just how good Crisp was across week 4. Jackie Love is more of a background player, but I think that's a good thing overall for Top Esports. That's when they were at their best in winter, when Jackie Love could kind of play more of a, secondary carry 2v2 type of role for the team. So excited to see how they ended up playing this out. And for LGD Gaming, obviously you would have loved to see them cap off what was a pretty good week with a really big win, but it's Top Esports. You're not going to panic or freak out too much to the loss here. This is more of the same when it comes to JDG. It's unfortunately like Scout and Pays playing really well. Pays in particular being the best AD carry in the LPL, and Scout having a good series overall, definitely showing a lot of positive traits, especially in that game 1 on the Lissandra, but just not having like the full picture, the full complete roster to be able to go toe-to-toe with a team like JDG. Alla is going to get my dud of the series on the top side. The Jax and the Gnar in particular were bad. The Sion wasn't great in game 1 either. I just really wasn't impressed with him. This is the problem. He has been consistently losing to the good top laners in the LPL, and that's not good enough for a team like JDG. They brought him in because he was supposed to be the big upgrade to, again, both Sheer and Flandre, and he's not been that for this team, so that's disappointing. Of course, missing also was a pretty big letdown in this series. I think the Kalista Ash lane in game number 1 was unrealistic expectations for how the rest of this series would go. The Alistar, the Nico, not nearly as good from missing. And then Xun was good outside of the smites. And I think that is still such a big part of the game. Obviously, it's kind of your big job at the end of a lot of these games. Game number 2 was very winnable if Xun was just able to press that smite key on Lilia. It just didn't end up happening. And like we said, if Xun, Scout, and Pays are not all playing at a top level when you're going up against a team like Top Esports, this team can't win. Xun made minor, very tiny mistakes throughout a lot of the back half of the series, and it was enough to say that JDG was entirely out of contention. I still think this is probably a top 3 team in the LPL, but Top Esports is number 1 in the LPL for a reason. This team is just running things at this level, and I've been nothing but impressed. Kanavi's running away with MVP. 369 has been arguably the best top laner in the LPL. Crisp was awesome this week, probably the best performing support in the entire league this week. Everything is just working out for Top Esports, and they continue to be at the top of the LPL standings. Alright, but that is going to do it for my LPL week number 4 overview and analysis video here in the spring split. Up on the screen, the standings after week number 4. We're really starting to get a clearer picture of where these teams are going to land. Of course, Top Esports at the top of the standings sitting at 6-1. They're going to stay at number 1 in my power rankings, which you can see to the right of every single team, where I personally power rank these teams from number 1 to number 16. Change is going to be how that has changed from last week to this week. We can go over some risers and fallers. The top upper echelon, they're staying the same. Top Esports is at 1. Anyone's Legend is going to stay at 2, despite their loss to LGD Gaming, because I think they're going to be better in the long run, and JDG will stay at 3 because their inconsistency kind of keeps them out of the top 2, but they do have some incredible highs. Those are the top 3 teams in the LPL. I feel pretty confident in saying that at the current moment, despite what a lot of these teams are showing off at specific times, but everything else, one giant cluster, 4 to 6, whatever order you want. The order I have them in right now, Weibo Gaming moving up to number 4. They were the best of these 3 teams across this week, and right now it's all just about current form, because there's really not a lot to differentiate these teams. So Weibo jumps up to 4. Invictus is only going to fall to 5. I think they're still in contention for being a top 4 team right now. They're just inconsistent. And Bilibili's going to fall to 6. I get that they looked good in their one series this week. I don't trust this team at all. I don't trust them against good competition. It's great that they can beat up on the bad teams. I don't think they're going to be able to beat up on the good teams. So they're moving down to number 6. Ninjas in Pyjamas continue to be the gatekeepers at number 7, but they're losing that spot very quickly. They've looked awful across weeks 3 and 4. Even against bad teams, and so 7 is definitely hanging on by a thread for Ninjas in Pyjamas, but look who is jumping up to number 8, it's WE, a team that I had number 16 in my preseason power rankings, and going in to the spring split, they have halved that and gone up to number 8. They're a top half team in the LPL right now, in my opinion, and they've earned that. They've looked so good over the past couple of weeks. Hopefully they can keep this form up. For now, they're going to go 8. FPX is going to stay at 9, and Thunder Talk is actually going to fall all the way to number 10. Honestly, this looks like the weakest team in Group Ascend because they have the biggest weak links. Hoya and Satab are not playable in Group Ascend right now, so they fall down to number 10. Let me know if you agree or disagree with those Group Ascend movements, but I have a small movement in Group Nirvana, just kind of the result of the series these two teams played against each other. Edward Gaming is going to fall to 13, and Ultra Prime is going to go to 12. That's how I expect things to work out at the end here. They have basically the same record. EDG has a better plus-minus, which could haunt Ultra Prime with the way things end up going. That loss to LNG might be detrimental, but we'll see how EDG can respond going into next week. No other changes, though. Let me know if you would have changed anything that I didn't. I'm curious to know your thoughts and opinions down below, but let's go ahead and move into my player of the week and my dud of the week for week number 4, and hell is frozen over because look on your screen, player of the week in the LPL, Tyun, the AD carry for Team WE. I really do believe he was the best player in the LPL this week. He played incredible across his 4 series. I get that the first one against Invictus wasn't all that ideal, but the 3 that he won after that were awesome, and honestly, he wasn't the problem against Invictus. He played perfectly fine in that series. I was so impressed with his gameplay, with his confidence, with his positioning. This is the fabled Scrim Tyun that we've heard about over the past couple of years. It's nice to see it finally come out on the stage, whether it was against Thunder Talk, Weibo, or FPX. He played great in all 3 of those series, so pretty easy choice for player of the week, to be honest. My honorable mentions, Xiaohu, the mid laner for Weibo, definitely deserved it. Weibo had a pretty good week, not a perfect week, but a pretty good one, and Xiaohu was definitely kind of the driving force of that. And then Kanavi, the jungler for Top Esports, he's going to be an honorable mention basically every week just because that's the level he's playing at right now. If you wanted to give him player of the week every week, I'm certainly not going to complain, but those are my honorable mentions. Let's move on to my dud of the week, which is going to go to Leave, the AD carry for Ninjas in Pyjamas. A lot going wrong for that team right now. This guy was awful in week number 4. You can say that he's not the team's biggest problem, that he's a byproduct of where things are going wrong right now elsewhere on the map, but truly watching Leave's gameplay this week reminded me so much of the reason I fell out of love with him last year, where I was so in on him, you know, when he first came up before all the controversy, and then everything just like stopped being good. Like every single game from 15 to 20 minutes, he would just completely shut his brain off. That happened again this week, and it's so frustrating. I just need this guy to lock in. NIP can be a good team, but in their current configuration, I just have a hard time believing they're going to get there. So Leave is going to get my dud of the week. Tyun is going to get my player of the week, but that's gonna do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit subscribe. Of course, we're gonna continue covering the LPL in these 2-hour-long videos, but we're also gonna be covering the 3 other major regions, LTA North, LEC, LCK every single week. We cover the NACL Tier 2 in North America every week on this channel, so if you want a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. Of course, I am casting multiple times throughout this upcoming week, so stop by the LPL English channel. Links to that are going to be in the description. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.